7 million. That's how many Americans took to the streets on Saturday at nearly 3,000 events nationwide, marching under one banner: No Kings.
This is the most American thing that you can do. Protest and speak for what you believe in.
The people who come out here and fight and who want to resist, those are the people who make change. Those are the people who make history.
I wore the uniform since I was 18 years old. I never thought I would see this.
We live by the Constitution, and that we need to protect that more than anything.
They're not going to intimidate us with tyrant talk. We are out here to stand up for this democracy.
Do not cower to the fascism and the threats that are coming from D.C. That's what they want us to do, and they will only be successful in that if we remain silent.
I don't think we need a king. We definitely don't need a dictatorship, and it's time for him to go.
We have a constitution for a reason. It provides us inalienable rights that we have to adhere to. And in this country, we have no kings, period.
According to the NYPD, more than 100,000 New Yorkers marched across all 5 boroughs, quote, peacefully exercising their First Amendment rights, and the NYPD made 0 protest-related arrests. And while thousands packed Times Square in Donald Trump's hometown to protest against Trump's authoritarian playbook, Donald Trump posted an AI-generated video of himself as a fighter pilot flying a jet labeled King Trump while wearing a crown. The New York Times reports, quote, the fake video set to the song Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins shows the plane dropping a brown liquid resembling feces onto the heads of protesters who appeared to be gathered in a city. That was the President of the United States' response to Americans exercising their right to protest. In a statement, Kenny Loggins said, quote, I can't imagine why anybody would want their music used or associated with something created with the sole purpose of dividing us. Too many people are trying to tear us apart, and we need to find new ways to come together. We're all Americans, and we're all patriotic. There is no us and them. That's not who we are, nor is it what we should be. It's all of us. We're in this together, and it is my hope that we can embrace music as a way of celebrating and uniting each and every one of us. But tell that to Republicans, who have spent weeks calling the No Kings protests a, quote, hate America rally, and dismissing the concerns of everyday American citizens across the country. Tell that to House Speaker Mike Johnson, who continued to spread those lies days after the peaceful protests. This morning, Mike Johnson displayed photos of signs at Saturday's protests and defended Donald Trump's AI video.
The president uses social media to make a point. You can argue he's probably the most effective person who's ever used social media for that. He is using satire to make a point?
Mike Johnson never said what that point was. Meanwhile, here on Earth One, millions of Americans were living in reality and defending it, including in Chicago, where an estimated 250,000 Chicagoans peacefully demonstrated against Donald Trump's policies and his deportation campaign against their city. Our next guest, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, spoke at Saturday's rally.
We will not bend, we will not bow, we will not cower, we will not submit to the authoritarianism that is coming down. I want to make this point emphatically clear, that the attempt to divide and conquer this nation will not prevail, because when the people are united, justice always prevails.
Now, here's what Trump could be working on while he's posting dumb juvenile videos. Today, the government shutdown became the 3rd longest shutdown in history. And with no end in sight, hundreds of thousands of federal employees are missing paychecks. Trump did nothing about that today. Under President Trump, auto loan delinquencies are surging. The Washington Post reports, quote, the weakness in the auto market is one of the clearest indications that low and middle income families, the economy's foundation, could be starting to buckle. Because many Americans need their cars to get around, auto loan delinquencies can be a telling gauge of financial hardship. Trump did nothing about that. Under President Trump, Americans' paychecks are still not keeping up with inflation as the Trump tariffs make everyday goods more expensive. A new poll shows 68% of adults describe the economy these days as poor, while 32% say it's good. 59% say their family finances are holding steady, and 28% say they are falling behind. Only 12% say they're getting ahead. Those are real issues Americans are dealing with, and yet the President of the United States seems more interested in being a king, both in reality and in warped digital fantasies. That's why millions of Americans showed up on Saturday, peacefully marching, speaking out, and reminding the country that in this nation, the power belongs to the people. Leading off our discussion tonight, Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of the Indivisible Project. Ezra, great to see you again. It's been a long time. What do you want Americans to take away from seeing millions march across the country?
Look, I want them to understand that this is not the Trump era. This is the No Kings era. Trump just happens to be living in it. There are more of us than there are of them. And we demonstrated with the largest protest in American history. Keep that in mind. The largest protest in American history in a single day happened on Saturday. And it was people in blue states, in red states, in purple states, people in rural areas, in city centers, in deep Trump country. They were showing up to say something very simple, that we don't do kings in this country. And Donald Trump, look, he wants us at each other's throats. He wants us to believe there is a war brewing in Portland or in Chicago or in rural America or in deep blue city America, that it's the red states versus the blue states. And this is the fight that we've got to fight. But we had 2,700 events in every single congressional district in this country on Saturday, and there wasn't one reported instance of violence. The world that Donald Trump thinks that we live in does not exist. It's only in his AI-addled brain that it exists. He's got the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old, while normal everyday Americans are standing up to fight for their First Amendment rights. Do I want somebody to look at this and be scared? No, I want them to be hopeful that actually we are going to build a better future together, and it is okay to stand up and oppose this regime.
So, Ezra, what is your response to Trump's meltdown and Speaker Johnson and other Republicans who called what happened on Saturday a Hate America rally?
Well, you just have to first laugh, right? Because they couldn't even call it No Kings because they knew how unobjectionable the branding of No Kings was. Who would disagree with No Kings in America? So they spent 10 days or more every day talking about how this was the Hate America rally and there were going to be violent communists in the streets. And then lo and behold, none of that materializes and they have to scramble. So I feel for them. They're between a rock and a hard place. They're implementing the least popular agenda in modern American history, and the largest peaceful protest in history was just on the streets on Saturday. They've got to figure out something to say. So they're trying to say either it didn't ever happen, it wasn't real, or those weren't real Americans. I don't think they have a good argument here. If I was them, I would stop shutting down the government and closing rural hospitals and jacking up healthcare premiums and start implementing a policy agenda that people won't protest in record numbers against.
Ezra, how do you keep the momentum going after such a massive turnout? What's next for the No Kings movement?
Gosh, that is the question, Jonathan. That is the question. But I want to remind folks, this didn't come out of nowhere. In April, we had 3 million people out in 1,300 events for Hands Off. In June, we had 5 million people out in 2,100 events. And then on Saturday, we had 7 million people out at 2,700 events. 3 million, 5 million, 7 million. The momentum is going. It is building. What I would encourage everybody watching to do next is come to the No Kings follow-up call tomorrow night at 8 p.m. We are going to be talking about how we turn one-day marches into consistent, productive, on-the-ground organizing. And I don't care if you're in a blue state, a red state, or a purple state. You are needed in this movement. We are still growing, and there's a lot more work to do.
Ezra Levin, my fellow Carleton grad, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Joining us now is the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. Mayor Johnson, great to see you again. Thank you for coming to The Last Word. How did you feel when you looked around at the turnout in Chicago on Saturday?
Yeah, very encouraged. Over 100,000 people in the streets throughout the city of Chicago, some estimated 250,000 people, obviously 7 million around the country. I'm certainly encouraged that the people of not just the city of Chicago, but people across the country are really beginning to wake up and see what it's going to take to beat back against this authoritarian rule.
Do you worry, Mayor, your speech at Saturday's No Kings rally will further put you and your city, the city of Chicago, in the crosshairs of the Trump administration?
Look, we're already in the mix. Right? You know, the president of the United States of America declared war on the city of Chicago. And in fact, he's declared war on working people across this country. And in order for us to beat back this tyranny, it's going to take all of us to be organized and to be clear about our demands, making sure that our schools are funded, healthcare is fully funded, transportation, good paying jobs. These are the things that the people of this country desperately need, particularly at a time in which the ultra-rich continue to get richer under this administration.
At Saturday's rally, Mayor, you called for a general strike. I want to play some of what you said.
If my ancestors as slaves can lead the greatest general strike in the history of this country, taking it to the ultra-rich and big corporations, we can do the same today. We are going to make them pay their fair share in taxes to fund our schools, to fund jobs, to fund health care, to fund transportations. Democracy will live on because of this generation. Are you ready to take it to the courts and to the streets?
What would a successful strike look like to you?
Well, first of all, if there was ever a time for working people to unite across our country, this is that time. You know, I'm reminded of the words of Dr. King when he said that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement were to ever collide, what enormous potential we would have. And we're in the midst of that right now. What it means is that working people across this country have to send a real strong message to the ultra-rich and to these large corporations who have received, you know, one of the greatest tax cuts and benefits than any other time in the history of our country. And if we're not willing to put forth some real economic demands, if that means, of course, withholding our labor, if we're not prepared to do that, then I don't see how we can transform this country. Every single major social movement throughout our history had a full strategy, whether it was litigation, the courts, and also economic boycott, particularly at a time in which the concentration of wealth continues to grow while more and more people continue to barely have the ends meeting at the end of each week and at the end of each month.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about the Montgomery bus boycott. One more question for you, Mayor Johnson. You filed another lawsuit against the Trump administration, this time because Trump has threatened to withhold tens of millions of dollars in critical federal grants for disaster relief. What message do you hope the lawsuit sends to other cities facing those same challenges?
Look, we have to band together to fight back. In the courts, that's still one place where I believe that there is some check on this administration. And when we filed this lawsuit, there were 8 other cities that joined us, just like there are cities across this country that are now creating ice-free zones, right? And so what we're doing is simply leading the only way Chicago knows how. Being on the front lines is something that we're very accustomed to, and it's going to take all of us to ensure that we dismantle tyranny in this country, save our democracy, and protect humanity.
Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thank you.
And coming up, Donald Trump and his Republican allies have spent 20 days hiding from the Epstein scandal as the government remains shut down. But our next guest, Congressman Eric Swalwell, saw firsthand at California's No Kings rally that the American people are done with Trump's abuse of power. That's next. Today marks day 20 of the Trump Republican government shutdown, and still no progress. The House of Representatives was out of session again today, which means that since August, Republican Speaker Mike Johnson has allowed just 12 legislative days for House members. 12 in 3 months. Democrats say there's a reason for that, and it's to shield Donald Trump from the embarrassment of what's in the Epstein files. Speaker Johnson is still refusing to swear in Arizona's newly elected Congresswoman Adelita Grijalva, who just happens to be the 218th signature needed on a bipartisan discharge petition that would force a vote to release the Epstein files. Instead of reopening the government or seating a duly elected member of Congress, Speaker Johnson spent his weekend defending Trump's latest distraction. Trump abruptly announced Friday he was commuting the 7-year prison sentence of former Republican Congressman George Santos. Santos was convicted of 27 felonies, including wire fraud, identity theft, and more. But Trump says the crime didn't fit the punishment because, quote, at least Santos had the courage, conviction, and intelligence to, and this is in all caps, always vote Republican. Here's what Speaker Johnson said about that on ABC This Week.
At least President Trump is fully transparent. He goes out and explains his rationale.
Is it okay for him to say
that
essentially I'm pardoning somebody because they always had the courage?
That's not the reason he pardoned.
Conviction and intelligence to always vote Republican.
That's one snippet of what he said among many things about George Santos.
But should that be a factor in pardoning somebody that they voted Republican?
I don't think
it was. Clemency?
No, I don't think it was. I just think he's talking about this individual and his past, and at least he's open and transparent about it.
Come on, Speaker Johnson, open and transparent? Donald Trump has never been fully transparent about anything. Not his taxes, not his abuse of power, and not his motives. Like with Ukraine. Trump has turned his back on America's allies during Russia's war on Ukraine time and time again, and taking Russian President Vladimir Putin's positions and talking points instead. Now we are learning more about Trump's private meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House this past Friday. CNBC reports Trump, who said Ukraine should accept Russia's terms for ending the war by handing over the entire eastern territory of Donbass, also warned the Ukrainian leader that Putin had told him in a lengthy phone call on Thursday, in which they agreed to hold in-person talks in Hungary, that Russia would, quote, destroy Ukraine if it did not agree to the demand. The meeting between Trump and Zelensky descended into a shouting match, the Financial Times reported, with Trump cursing all the time, according to unnamed people familiar with the matter cited by the FT. At the end of that meeting, Trump declined Zelensky's request for Ukraine to use United States supply of long-range Tomahawk missiles against Russia. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. He is a member of the Judiciary and House Homeland Security Committees. Congressman Swalwell, great to see you.
You too, John.
Trump is now telling reporters the best way to end the war with Russia is to give away Ukrainian land to Putin. Isn't this exactly what Putin wants?
Look, last week, Trump said that perhaps Zelensky was going to get Tomahawk missiles, and then Daddy Putin called him and said that he had spoken out of school. And now Trump looks quite weak. He's not able to deliver on what he promised to Zelensky. For Americans, we look like we're leaving our friends in the fields, and our allies, again, are scratching their head, wondering if we're really committed to the cause of democracy. But at the end of the day, Jonathan, Donald Trump said this conflict would end on day one. We are approaching day 300. We are no closer. He thinks he deserves a Nobel Prize. He deserves nothing. He is weak. He's failed in this effort. Ukraine, again, is threatened. Democracy is on the line. And the American presidency and its ability, to deliver remains in question to people who are counting on us.
Let's switch gears to the shutdown. Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said that he spoke with Speaker Johnson over the weekend. What do you know about where the shutdown stands?
People are hurting. And they know that Republicans run the White House, the Senate, and the House. They could open up the Congress and have us negotiate, but they won't do it for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, they know the second they do it, they have to vote on releasing the Epstein files, which means admitting just how close Donald Trump is to the most notorious child sex trafficker. So Mike Johnson right now stands as a pedophile protector. That's what he's doing by protecting Jeffrey Epstein's legacy and history from becoming more public. But second, Jonathan, as we approach open enrollment, where most Americans find out what their health insurance premiums are going to cost every month, Republicans refuse to put back in place subsidies that make sure low income and middle class Americans can afford health insurance. And if you're not a low income or middle class American, Jonathan, you're still affected, because the way health insurance works is the more people who are insured, the less that we all pay. So Republicans don't want to work, have closed down Congress, have closed down the federal government, aren't paying federal workers, and most Americans are going to pay more next year when it comes to the health insurance premium.
Well, I mean, you can't get those Epstein files released that you were talking about earlier until you get 218 votes. And that can't happen because of the inability of the House Speaker to swear in Adelita Grijalva. Let me get your reaction to what Speaker Johnson said earlier today about why he's not swearing in the Congresswoman-elect.
I will administer the oath to her, I hope on the first day we come back, legislative session. I'm willing and anxious to do that. In the meantime, instead of doing TikTok videos, she should be serving her constituents. She could be taking their calls. She can be directing them, trying to help them through the crisis that the Democrats have created by shutting down the government.
I'm sorry.
No, dum-dum. She doesn't have constituents. She's not a member of Congress. She doesn't have a budget to help anybody. Again, he has a new answer for this every single time he is asked, but the motive remains the same. He is a pedophile protector. He is protecting Jeffrey Epstein, and he's protecting Donald Trump from all of us learning just how close Trump is to Epstein.
New polling from the Associated Press is showing how Americans are feeling 10 months into the Trump administration. Donald Trump's approval rating stands at 37%. 68% of Americans have a negative view of the U.S. economy. And 47% of U.S. adults are not very or not at all confident they could find a job if they wanted to, a 10-point jump from October of 2023. Congressman Swalwell, did you encounter any buyer's remorse or people who thought Trump might make the economy better at No Kings this weekend?
Yes, I spoke at the No Kings rally in Sacramento and also in Pleasanton, California, in my district. And what I heard was, we were promised lower costs on day one, and people in my district work very hard, and they expect that if they're going to bet on themselves, that their country will bet on them, that they'll bet on their health care, they'll bet on increasing their wages and lowering their costs, bet on their safety. And we have not seen any of that. The president has not shown any focus on reducing what we spend or raising the wages we have to spend on what we need to provide for our family. That's why his numbers are in the tank. If he just focused on that, if he declared war on high prices rather than war on America's cities, he would find a lot more confidence in him from the American people.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, great state of California, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For coming back to The Last Word. Coming up, the latest developments on Donald Trump's revenge tour. Joyce Vance joins us next. Now to the latest on Donald Trump's push to have the Justice Department act as his own personal revenge squad. Attorneys for former FBI Director James Comey filed motions today seeking to get the criminal charges against him dropped for what they characterized as, quote, multiple glaring constitutional violations and an egregious abuse of power by the federal government. One motion states, the government has singled out Mr. Comey for prosecution because of his protected speech and because of President Trump's personal animus toward Mr. Comey. Such a vindictive and selective prosecution violates the First Amendment, Due Process Clause, and equal protection principles. The proper remedy for this unconstitutional prosecution is dismissal with prejudice. That came hours after James Comey's counsel pushed back on claims made by the Trump Justice Department that Comey's attorney should be disqualified in this case. Politico reports federal prosecutors signaled Sunday that they may seek to boot Patrick Fitzgerald, James Comey's lead defense attorney, because of Fitzgerald's alleged involvement in disclosures to the media shortly after President Donald Trump fired Comey as FBI director in 2017. Fitzgerald fired back at prosecutors Monday morning, accusing them of attempting to defame him with demonstrably false allegations. Quote, there was no leaking of classified information to the press by either Mr. Comey or his counsel, full stop, Fitzgerald and other defense attorneys wrote. Patrick Fitzgerald is a former federal prosecutor himself with experience prosecuting high-profile cases involving organized crime, terrorism, and political corruption. Two of the men Fitzgerald helped put in prison, former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich and Scooter Libby, the former chief of staff to former Vice President Dick Cheney, were later pardoned by Trump, who is, of course, himself a convicted criminal. Just so you remember. Joining us now, Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and a professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. She is an MSNBC legal analyst and also the author of the new book, her first book, Giving Up is Unforgivable, a manual for keeping a democracy, which comes out tomorrow. Joyce, congratulations.
Thank you.
Welcome back to The Last Word. So first, take us through the motion to dismiss filed today by former FBI Director Comey.
Right. So there are two motions to dismiss. One argues that this is a selective and vindictive prosecution, and the indictment is due to be dismissed on that grounds. The other is very interesting. It argues that Trump's new appointment to be the U.S. Attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia was improperly appointed.
What's her name again?
Put in office. Her name is Lindsay Halligan. She's an insurance lawyer from Florida. She was dropped into the Eastern District of Virginia. And so this unusual motion says, actually, it should have been up to the court to appoint a new U.S. attorney, but because Trump put her in place and she signed the indictment, it's invalid. And the key to both of these motions, Jonathan, is the same. It's the remedy that Comey's team asks for. They ask that the indictment be dismissed with prejudice, which means the government can't file any charges against Comey afterward.
How successful do you think they'll be?
You know, typically motions for successive or rather for selective and vindictive prosecution fail. They face a whole host of procedural hurdles. But if there's ever a case where a motion like this will succeed, it's this case where the president has trumpeted the fact that he's targeting Jim Comey. There was this, I think it was, frankly, a text message gone astray, posted publicly on Truth Social to the Attorney General.
Oh, the one that said Pam?
Directing her, yes. Pam, please prosecute Director Comey. I'm paraphrasing. And so I think that there's a very strong case here. In both regards, it's likely that this case won't go to trial.
You accurately predicted both of today's motions in your Substack nearly 2 weeks ago.
Well, it wasn't much of a prediction now because Pat Fitzgerald, Comey's lawyer, had said he would file them.
Okay, well, I'm still going to quote you to you. Everything is building towards the two motions the defense said it expected to file. One to dismiss the cases because Halligan, the only prosecutor to sign the indictment, wasn't properly appointed to office, so the indictment is fatally flawed. A second motion will charge some species of selective and or vindictive prosecution. That latter motion in particular keeps looking better and better. So do you think this case will even make it to trial? I think you just said a moment ago, no.
I mean, I do. I think that there's a good chance that it gets dismissed. The judge in this case is a Biden appointee, but he has a reputation as being straight up the middle. He was a federal public defender before he became a judge. I think he'll look at the law and the facts in this case, and they are not good for the government.
Is there any chance the Trump team is successful in getting Patrick Fitzgerald removed from the case?
I think that there's a zero chance that they'll succeed in getting him removed. You know, this response that Fitzgerald has filed is indignant. And rightfully so. He says that the motion wasn't made in good faith. And it's a little bit strange. This is all about an effort by the government to review some evidence that they obtained electronically in another case years ago for use in this case. And what happened was they asked the judge to decide their request to do that very quickly, more quickly than the local rules provide for. And in the course of this sort of obscure procedural motion, they make the statement, by the way, we think that Pat Fitzgerald and Jim Comey were criming together, that they were involved in this release of classified documents. The response says, absolutely not. There's an Inspector General report that says no. And the Justice Department looked at the situation and declined to prosecute. And so Fitzgerald and Comey accused Trump's new U.S. attorney of making the allegations in bad faith.
All right, let's talk about this. Again, your first book, as someone who's also written their first book, I know how exciting tomorrow must be for you. What do you hope readers get from your book?
You know, do you remember that feeling after Kamala Harris lost and people were dejected and ready to give up on democracy? That filled me with a lot of sadness. And what I wanted to do was go back and look at our country's history and look at the rule of law and give people confidence that the country had been through bad times before, times that looked, you know, pretty unsalvageable, and that we had fought our way through because people and institutions can mobilize and they can be nimble about finding new ways to uphold democracy. And so that's what I hope people will do. I hope that they'll find a reason. You know, 7 million of us did it over the weekend. We're moving the right direction. We just can't afford to give up.
And I was about to ask you, what signs did you get from Saturday that show that the American people haven't given up?
You know, I think that we see a lot of people who are out there, and the important thing is if all of those people will talk with their friends and neighbors about what's going on, it's these small conversations between Americans that matter the most.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I didn't even write this book. I'm so excited for you. Publish day is tomorrow. Joyce Vance, thank you, as always, for coming to The Last Word.
Thanks, Jonathan.
The new book is called Giving Up is Unforgivable, a manual for keeping a democracy, for keeping a democracy. Coming up, this case would be a crapshoot. That's how Donald Trump's former labor secretary, Alex Acosta, described a potential trial against Jeffrey Epstein to the House Oversight Committee. Lisa Rubin will join us next to discuss more of what we learned from Alex Acosta's testimony. This case would be a crapshoot. That is what Donald Trump's former labor secretary, Alex Acosta, said during an interview with the White House Oversight Committee about a potential trial against sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein when Epstein was first arrested in 2006. Alex Acosta claimed the case had evidentiary issues and cited concerns about the credibility of the victims up against Epstein's defense team as reasons for not prosecuting, quote, "We put him in jail. He registered as a sex offender, and the victims had an opportunity to recover. And that was a win. Looking at all of this, the ultimate judgment was, do you roll the dice? And if he gets away with it, you're sending a signal to the community that he can get away with it." Alex Acosta disagreed that he gave Jeffrey Epstein a sweetheart deal, a deal that allowed Jeffrey Epstein to avoid federal prosecution and potentially life in prison, and instead serve only 13 months in jail, where he was given work release privileges nearly every day. The top-ranking Democrat on the committee, Congressman Robert Garcia, pressed Alex Acosta about what is alleged to have happened during that time. Quote, Garcia, "You do recognize that he went on to abuse other women. You recognize that." Acosta, "If there's evidence that he went on to abuse other women, that evidence should be brought forward." And Garcia, "You're not aware, you can't say with certainty that he abused other women after he was during his sentence?" Acosta, "I have not reviewed facts after the prosecution." Garcia, "I mean, it's been widely reported, so that's surprising." Alex Acosta testified that he never discussed Jeffrey Epstein with Donald Trump prior to his confirmation as labor secretary, a position he resigned after Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in 2019 brought new scrutiny on his role in the previous deal. And he said he did not recall seeing Donald Trump's name on any documents related to the Epstein case. A spokesperson for Democrats on the Oversight Committee said in a statement, quote, "The transcripts of Alex Acosta's interview confirm what we've known all along. He has no remorse for his mishandling of the Epstein case. Because of the deal Alex Acosta gave Epstein, he was able to continue assaulting and raping young women and girls for another decade." Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, thank you for coming to The Last Word. First time we're meeting in person. What was your impression of the questions that the committee asked Acosta?
I thought some of the questions that the committee asked were really good, and I think there were other missed opportunities. But let's talk about the good part. I really like the exchange between Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett and Alex Acosta because it exposed sort of what a relic Acosta has become. When she was pressing him about the fact that he had said that the witnesses had credibility issues, and I want to be clear, Acosta said, as far as he was concerned, the witnesses had no credibility issues, but many of them didn't want to testify. Some of them insisted that Jeffrey Epstein should have no time at all in jail. Crockett really drilled down on him and said, why is it that you don't think that these women could have survived impeachment, meaning impugning of their credibility by defense counsel? And Acosta was sort of taken a little bit aback by that, but Crockett invoked an example from her own time as defense lawyer and said, look, I defended a serial rapist who was accused of raping multiple prostitutes, and yet the jury gave him life. Why did you think that these women couldn't have survived cross-examination on the stand, suggesting that she thought that his explanation of what had gone down wasn't particularly credible?
Well, what did you think of how Acosta answered questions during this interview, from Crockett, from Garcia, from other members of the committee?
I thought that Acosta doesn't have much firsthand recollection. That's not hugely surprising to me, considering that the events were 20 years ago. But also, he was interviewed by the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility 5 years ago. And a report that came out shortly after the 2020 election, when people like you and me and most of the nation was distracted with something else going on.
What could have that been?
But Acosta was holding that report to him like a teddy bear. He clutched it so tightly, and I don't mean literally, I just mean he was so reliant on the report. In lieu of his personal recollections, he was almost treating it like an oral argument Bible. Instead of it being testimony, it was as if he was treating it like an opportunity to argue first to the committee and then to the American public. Here's why I'm not responsible. Look at what so-and-so said in the OPR report. Look at what this person said in the OPR report. But in terms of his own real-time recollection of what transpired in his office, he had very little of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, what are some lingering questions that you would want to know more about after reading the transcript?
So the non-prosecution agreement has a bunch of features in it that I don't think have been adequately explained. One of them is something that some of the Congress people asked questions about, which is, why are there 4 alleged co-conspirators in the non-prosecution agreement who got the benefit of the bargain that Jeffrey Epstein and his lawyers struck? Those women, according to Acosta, to the best of his knowledge, were never interviewed by anyone in the office. And yet, the non-prosecution agreement prevented the Southern District of Florida from prosecuting any of the 4 of them. How is it that they came to be in that agreement? The other thing that I find troubling is Acosta defended himself, and you read this quote before, by saying that he ensured that the victims would get restitution. Mm-hmm. But that's part of the story. What happened was they ended up giving Jeffrey Epstein and his lawyers a list of potential victims. And in exchange, Epstein said if those people sued him under a particular statute, he would not contest liability. But in the process, the U.S. Attorney's Office effectively turned over to Epstein and his lawyers a list of people that the U.S. Attorney's Office knew to be victims. If you don't think that resulted in some intimidation campaigns against those people, you're kidding yourself, particularly when Acosta testified that his own first assistant U.S. attorney was subject to a very aggressive recusal campaign. Why? Because that guy's daughter had been stalked. And on the basis of his reporting it to police, Epstein's lawyer said he couldn't possibly be fair and impartial with respect to Epstein's own case. That's sick. But Acosta never draws the connection that if that's how Epstein's lawyers treated a prosecutor who wasn't likely to, run scared, what did he do to the victims? We know from Virginia Giuffre's memoir that comes out tomorrow that at one point Jeffrey Epstein showed her a grainy photograph of her little brother, seeming as if it was taken by like a private investigator or someone with a long lens, and said, "We know where your brother goes to school." So I have some real questions about what kind of tactics they used against the victims in this case, and why Alex Acosta doesn't think that the things that they did to his team, they were perfectly capable of doing to dissuade victims from themselves coming forward and testifying.
More questions that need to be asked and answered. Lisa Rubin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is tonight's last word.